Kevin, have you looked at the channel stats recently?
No, I haven't. I've been pretty busy, and you know I don't care about stats.
Well, since you put up your first tutorial video, we've had the largest jump in subscriber numbers since the channel went live.
Really? How many?
Well, put it this way. If we were to invite all these people over for dinner, we'd have to rent some more plates.
Hello and welcome back. So the response to the first tutorial video was much greater than I anticipated. We got like 30 to 40 new subscribers, which for small potatoes like me is fantastic. So welcome to all the new people. I'm glad to have you here, and let's get on with it. So just as a reminder, these videos are being created as kind of supplemental material to Adam Kreutinger's fantastic Puppetry 101 series. So I urge you to go and watch that first, and then these videos are kind of little study aids to Adam's already fantastic video. So today we're going to be talking about mouth movement, all kinds of mouth movement, and not just the physical techniques that you need to get good lip sync and mouth movement in general, but also the kind of mental state that you need to be in. One thing I would really like to emphasize is that when we're talking about all these techniques, the goal is to really internalize all this stuff. At first, it's going to seem a bit overwhelming because you're trying to sort of consciously think about all these things. But the point is to practice enough to get to a point where you've internalized all this stuff so you're not actually consciously thinking about it. So if you're struggling a little bit, if you're sort of stumbling and you're not quite where you want to be, that's fine. Just keep working at it. Eventually, it will sink down to a subconscious level and you won't even think about it when you're performing. You'll just be performing. So just a little tip there, that don't worry about not being great out of the gate. So the first thing to practice, of course, is eye focus, as we talked about last time. But what people really want to do when they jump in is to just start making the puppet talk. Of course, it's logical. So when you give a new person or somebody who isn't used to puppeteering a puppet for the first time, what do? Well, they probably do this. They open the mouth, right? Of course, that's the one thing you know a hand puppet does, is their mouth opens and closes. So the first thing you're going to want to do is open the mouth. And so then when they go to make the puppet talk, they're usually starting from this position, so they're closing the mouth. This, of course, is the opposite to what you want to happen. So the first lesson, and this is something that you can practice, and you'll get this really quickly, is that your default position is not open. Your default position is closed. And the first thing as a puppeteer that you should do the first time you put on a puppet is close the mouth and make sure that this is your default position. So Adam has talked at length about syllables and how to break down words into syllables, and those are the beats you should be hitting. So when you start from your default closed position, you open the mouth on every syllable. Sometimes, if you're going faster, you don't open the mouth on every syllable. You open the mouth on every other syllable. And this is something that I found some puppeteers can overemphasize, because then they start talking really fast and the puppet starts going like this and it's a little jittery. It's very, very distracting when you're trying to do every syllable. But that's really it. You're breaking down words into chunks, into little manageable pieces that you are sending out. And that's the first real kind of mental trick. When people put on a puppet for the first time and they open the mouth, they are thinking about, when they make the puppet talk, you're going, I'm taking my words from my head and putting them into the puppet, right? So when you're doing this, when you're starting from open and you're doing this, what does it look like? It looks like the words are coming out of me and going into the puppet, and the puppet is eating them, right? Well, that's the opposite direction from what you want. What you need to mentally address is that your words aren't coming from your head. The words are coming from here. So you are sending the words out. And this, of course, is related to the infamous Henson Punch. One of the many innovations that Jim Henson did in terms of performance was, before this, when puppets talk, they often talk just sort of like flapping around like this. Henson added a little sort of wrist thing where the words are being spit out. And so the words are being projected from the puppet's mouth. You are sending them out, almost throwing them. This is something that I don't see a lot of tutorial stuff covering is about the movement and the relationship between the head and the wrist. You should have a kind of looseness in your wrist. You should always kind of, when you're moving, you actually lead with the wrist. So for example, if the puppet were to come up, you would have this kind of residual motion. In animation, this is called secondary motion, where you have an object, as it were, in this case, the body, is actually pushing the head up. And so your first movement with the head is not for the head to come up. The first movement is the arm to come up, and then the head sort of dips and follows, if you can see that. And this is related to the Henson Punch. So in many ways, when you think about puppeteering, you're not really focusing that much on the hand as you are on the wrist. The wrist is kind of your axle point. It's the point around which the head moves. And it's really good practice to get that kind of loose and floaty. So always lead with the wrist, never lead with the head. Unless, of course, you're doing something that calls for leading with the head, like if you're running really intently, your head's forward and you're running like that. But if you're just walking, the body's actually walking first and the head's kind of following it. So leading with the wrist is a really good technique to learn when it comes to making kind of more natural motions with the puppet. So there's the first series of tips in terms of things like head motion and mouth movement and lip syncing. Is first to consider the direction that the words are going. The words are coming out of the puppet's mouth and being sent to the world. The second is to keep the wrist loose and always lead with the wrist. Now the other thing that you'll hear very often is puppeteers talking about dropping the jaw, not flipping the lid. And of course that's relatively self-explanatory. So when you think about how a mammal's jaw is articulated, the jaw in fact is dropping. It's not the top of the head that's flipping up and down. So you don't want to do this, you want to do this. You want to always drop the thumb and try and keep the top of the head as level as you can. I'm really glad that Adam went into this because this is not something you hear very often. People talk about dropping the jaw as if it were trying to mimic natural speech. That's not really what it's about, because I mean these are like monsters, and they're not people. They don't have to talk like people talk. But what you do need to do is maintain eye focus. So not flipping the lid is more about maintaining eye focus than it is about talking naturally. We all know how important eye focus is from the first lesson. Now, here we come to a situation that I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about, but I want to talk about it because it's something that I've encountered personally. That's all well and fine when you're just practicing, but if you're going to be using more than one puppet, you are eventually going to come up against a situation where you have to flip the lid. The physical construction of the puppet doesn't allow you to drop the jaw. It could be many factors at work. If the puppet doesn't have grips inside or the foam is too stiff, there's a whole bunch of reasons why you physically won't be able to drop the jaw instead of flipping the lid, or you won't be able to do it that well. What do you do then? And this is why I'm glad Adam talked about not flipping the lid as a function of eye focus rather than actual talking, because if you are in a position where you have to flip the lid, and sometimes you will be, the way to minimize the kind of damage that flipping the lid does is to be able to regain eye focus really fast. So I can give you an example of this from my own collection here. Probably the worst offender of any puppet that I own for this is good old Jelly Roll here. So the person who built Jelly Roll did a really good job on the outside. He looks fantastic, but not so great for a puppeteer on the inside. And here is something I think that is an important factor for people who build puppets. It's really helpful, even if you're not going to be a puppeteer, to have some puppetry skills so you know what a puppeteer wants and what is desirable in a puppet on the inside. Jelly Roll does not have any grips inside. His head is very small, as you can see. I don't have big hands. My hands are all cramped up like this inside him. The foam that was used to build his head is very thick, so there's no room in there. There's nothing I can do. And there's no way that I can sort of have my thumb anchored onto the bottom jaw here. So then what do you do?
Don't listen to him, everyone. I'm fine.
So Jelly Roll has an advantage in that he doesn't have pupils, of course. So it's really kind of easy to get eye focus back with Jelly Roll because you're not really sure where he's looking anyway. However, we can demonstrate regaining eye focus
after I've been talking for a bit, flipping the lid mostly.
So you see, you add little motions, little characterizations in there, keeping the wrist very loose, and when you're done talking, you have regained eye focus immediately.
And that really helps when you have to flip the lid.
You'll notice that I'm also using my wrist to sort of angle his head down like that, and that helps keep his eyes on a more level plane. This is a case where the puppet is physically, if I were to just open and close his mouth, he's clearly flipping the lid. But if you add in some wrist motion, you can maintain eye focus and flip the lid
at the same time.
So there we go. There was a real quick one today, but I hope it's some information you haven't heard other places. It is the kind of thing that you do have to find your own rhythm, and these are just little tips that I hope will get you to finding your own rhythm. Thanks so much for subscribing. Welcome to all the new people once again, and we'll catch you next time.